I'm just not quite sure why it opened that way for you.
Well, now I see your whole desktop, Felicia.
Yeah, because I've minimized some stuff. Is that better?
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, can you go like full screen mode in Google Sheets? I don't know if you can.
Mine is full screen.
It thinks it's showing as full screen. Okay, that's fine. We're good. All right, it's 1 o'clock. Everybody, if you wouldn't mind muting your microphones, and I am going to go ahead and why can I not broadcast? As co-host, do any of the rest of you see the broadcast button? It disappeared for me.
I'm looking.
It should be right up at the top.
No, I don't see it.
Don't either.
Where'd Allie go? Hold on, I'm going to leave the meeting and try to come back in and see.
Look. Okay.
Okay, guys, we are live. So I don't know how that happened, but Amy, if you'd like to start.
Yes, will do. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. In this unprecedented time, we hope that you are all safe and healthy, and we appreciate you taking the time to be here today. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. We will be running a live Q&A at the end of the webinar. So if you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the Q&A in your Zoom control panel. And if you miss anything, don't worry. We'll be sending around the recording when it's available. We will also be presenting poll questions, so be ready to respond. My name is Amy Chamberlain. I'm an instructional designer at the CE Shop, the leading provider of online real estate education. Today, we are reviewing the general concepts of agency as they relate to your licensing exam, presented by Felicia Johnson. Felicia comes to us with 10 years of experience within the Arkansas real estate industry. She owns her own real estate school, has worked as the principal broker for a real estate brokerage, and has served as president of the Northeast Arkansas Board of Realtors for 2 terms. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to Felicia.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our review for the test. I'm glad that you all are going to be joining us, and I would like to say, starting out, that I'm excited. Real estate, I've been in this industry for about 20 years. It's always good to get new people in, especially when you bring in with you new ideas that can continue to help advance this profession. And so I'm very thankful and I'm grateful for you all, and I hope that you find this time together worth your time. And I hope that everything that you learn here or review here helps you on that test. So as we go forward with our presentation today, what we're going to talk about is just those things in agency. And so there will be brief polls that you will be taking, and there also will be the question and answer section towards the end. So this is going to be your first Poll Anywhere question. And I just want to gauge the audience and just let me know right here at this Poll Anywhere how far along you are in your online course. Okay, getting some really good answers. Okay, so I have about 83% of you all, I think if I can count, responding, and it looks like 38% of you all are almost done, but there are some of you all that are just starting, some that are kind of midway through. Don't worry. Don't worry if you've just started or if you're almost done. If you've just started, you will get to agency and you will remember this. And if you're almost done, you've already had agency. And this is just going to shore up what you have already learned. So let's just kind of get going. So I want to show you what your test topics should look like. So you should have 17% of your knowledge concentrated on contracts, 13% on real estate practice, general agency is 13%, and then you can see all those other things there. So this graphic is to show you where you need to be concentrating some of your studying and the learning as you go through the online course. Now, so you see that the 13% of the general agency that we're going to talk about, that's a pretty good sized chunk. So make sure when you're studying that you understand as much as you can about general agency, because that's a pretty good chunk of what your test is going to be about. Agency being, of course, as we go along, who you represent and things of that nature. Under the general principles of agency, if you are a salesperson in your reviewing with us, that's again going to be 13%, and the brokers will have 11% of the questions pertaining to agency on their test. So just make sure if you're a salesperson, you're going to have 13%, and if you are a broker candidate, you will have 11%. And so today, what you see right now on the screen are the topics that we are going to discuss and help you review for the test. And so I'm just going to start out here with agency relationships. Sometimes I get excited, and I know that seems really crazy that anybody could be getting excited about studying a whole bunch of terms, but I kind of do. So don't forget that we will have the live Q&A at the end. So if I've gone too fast, I've missed something, make sure you write those questions down so that you can ask them. I don't want anyone to leave here feeling like they didn't get what they needed. So let's just talk about agency. Agency, that one word simply means the relationship between a principal and a broker. So let's relate that directly to real estate. So principal and client, PAL at the end of the word means it's a person, like your pal is your person, are the same. They are interchangeable. So in the test, it may say principal or it may say client, but you need to know for real estate that the principal, PAL, and client are the same person. That person is who hires you. That person gives you the authority to represent them or to act for them. And so in real estate, most of the time, your principal or your client is going to be the buyer, it's going to be the seller, it's going to be the owner of, will be the owner of property. The agent or the broker, who is us, who is going to be you when you pass this test, is the person that accepts the authority to work on behalf of someone else from the client or, of course, the principal. So that means if, hey, you're going to be my buyer and you call me up and we sit down with one another and we sign the agency agreement, you as my principal have just delegated authority to represent you in these matters to me. And then you have the third party customer. And from your studying, you will remember that a third party or the customer is someone who does not have an agency relationship with an agent. That does not mean that you can't help them buy a property or sell a property. It just means that that person is choosing to remain unrepresented, and you are not going to be able to help them with negotiation tactics or anything like that. Okay? Now, there are some different types. Sorry, guys. There are some different types of agency relationships: universal, general, and special. And so I'm going to go through these, and I'm also going to give you examples of what these relationships look like. So universal agency relationships means that someone can act just like they are you. Most of the time, there is a written document that gives someone that power. So you would be the principal or the client, and this may be the agreement. I'm just going to hold this piece of paper up. This may be the agreement that we would call a power of attorney. So you see that number 2, the POA. The power of attorney is someone who is able to act like you, but they get that authority from you in a legal document, and that person is said to be acting as your attorney in fact. Real estate agents, real estate brokers, we are not anybody's universal agent. You more than likely let someone be your universal agent or your power of attorney if they're your child, your spouse, your life partner, someone that you wholeheartedly trust. Now, let me tell you something. Some of us may not trust our spouses that much, but those are the people that you want to give that type of power to. A general agency relationship means that someone is able to represent you in a whole range of one business, though, or this business. In real estate, that looks like a property manager, because the landlord says, okay, I want you to collect the rent, I want you to take care of maintenance, I want you to advertise the property. So all of those things go into the one business of property management. And then you have special or specific. And I want to say specific as well, because if you don't see special on the test, I don't want you to be confused. Special or specific, that is when your authority is limited to one undertaking. Real estate agents and real estate brokers are called specific or special agents. If you call me and say, hey, Felicia, I heard you the best in the world at selling property, which I am, tell everybody you know, and I want you to sell my property, and we fill out a piece of paper, you are giving me authority to help you sell a piece of property. You're not giving me an authority to go out and take out a credit card in your name, although Dillard's is having a sale. You aren't giving me authority to go get insurance in your name. You are giving me the strict authority to help market and sell that piece of property. So on the test, remember that you, as a real estate agent, will be considered a special or a specific agent. And so that brings us to this poll question. Which of the following agents has the authority to bind the principal, who is the client, to the sale or lease of real property? So I'm going to give you a few minutes to read over that and then to log in your answers. Who can bind the principal? Looks like we have a battle over C and D. Okay, so a pretty good amount of you all have answered, and you answered that the answer would be C, a real estate broker named as special agent for a seller. So let's just go over the question one more time. Which of the following agents has the authority to bind the principal to the sale or lease of real property? So I am going to, I thought I had the answer on here, guys. I'm sorry. The answer should be B, a universal attorney in fact. So if you didn't get that answer right, don't beat yourself up. It can be very confusing, especially B and D. So if someone lets you have a power of attorney over them, but it's specific, that means it's going to be specific to one act or this group of acts, but not for everything in my life. But B, a universal attorney, in fact, is the person who can act for you in anything. Okay, is everybody good with that? I can't see, so I hope you are, and we're just going to move the slide forward. Okay, now let's talk about some terminology when we're talking about agency. We're going to talk about who clients are, and we're going to talk about who customers are, and they're just not the same people as you've already learned. So clients is someone, or they are people that you work for. They tell you things, they give you instructions, legal instructions, which you follow. Customers you work with. Okay, so I want to get something to closing. So if I don't represent you as a third party, I'm going to work with you to get this to close. But I am not going to help negotiate for you like I would a client. That is something, negotiation is something that is due to a client and not a customer. But you still owe some duties to customers to make sure that you are fair and honest and open with them. And we'll talk about that as we go further into to our lesson today. So let's look at this question. A broker and seller enter into a listing agreement. Within hours of listing the property, the broker writes an offer from an interested customer. Who does that broker represent? Remember, a broker and a seller enter into a listing agreement. Who is that broker representing? It's always exciting for me to see how your mind is working and what you're thinking. And this also gives me a launch pad into what we need to go into more depth. So the majority of you all put that broker represents the seller, and that is the correct answer. So the first line specifically says a broker and a seller enter into a listing agreement. That first line already tells you that, hey, that broker is obligated to that seller. The rest of the question, within hours of listing the property, the broker writes an offer from an interested customer. So remember that a customer is unrepresented. So if you see this question anytime or any question like that, the customer is unrepresented. And maybe that will help you as you go forward. All right. Okay. Now, what about this question? Who are the parties and what are the relationships that they have to one another in an independent contractor agreement? So this is going to be a new kind of question that's out there that we haven't previously talked about just yet. So who is who in an independent contractor agreement? When you go and work for a broker, you will be an independent contractor, but you will be in an agency relationship. Who are you and who is the broker? So here we're talking about within your company, when you go and work for a broker, who's going to be the agent and who is going to be the principal? Okay, great, great. I'm enjoying these answers. Y'all are doing such a great job. Correct. D, the broker is the principal and the licensee is the agent, is correct. So when you're working in a real estate brokerage, you are the agent, and everything that you do, you are doing on behalf of your principal broker. So that says that the broker is delegating authority to you. The person that delegates the authority is the principal, and the person that accepts that, you as the agent, is saying, yes, I want to go out and buy and sell and help manage property on your behalf. So the broker is the principal and the licensee is the agent. Y'all are doing good. Y'all are doing good. Y'all know more than I knew. Okay. Now, we've talked about the agency relationships, who is going to represent who, all of that. Let's talk about these non-agency relationships, because you can be in a transaction and every person in that transaction not be represented. So the first one we're going to talk about is a transaction broker. A transaction broker is someone who is involved in the transaction but does not help the buyer or the seller with negotiation strategy. This person is there to say, hey, maybe this is something that you need to think about, or maybe this is something that you need to think about. But this person is not representing either the buyer and the seller. And this person, as a transaction broker, can absolutely be paid for their expertise. And the facilitator goes kind of along with the transaction broker as well. That transaction broker facilitator may say, hey, I'm making sure that we get to closing by doing A, by reminding you that maybe you need to get your insurance, but not helping you with strategy on pricing, not saying that, hey, you need to put a contingency in the contract. That's what the agent does, the person that is representing someone. If you don't represent someone, you're just kind of tag along and you're helping. Which term, for our next Poll Anywhere question, which term best describes a broker who provides the required forms and property information and keeps personal information confidential for both parties in a transaction, but refrains from discussing negotiating strategy with either? Looks like we're going to have a clear winner here, and that answer is a transaction broker. Remember that the transaction broker has to keep everything personal and confidential, but cannot discuss strategy with you, with the seller, with the buyer. That person is not allowed to do that. People that are able to discuss negotiations are the real estate agents or the real estate brokers. The transactional brokers can never do that. So that's good that y'all have caught on to that and know what that means. Now, so we've talked about what agency is. We talked about what type of authority there is out there for an agency relationship, but I haven't talked to you about how to study for how to create agency relationships. Okay, so right here on this screen, you have a graphic that says, I love you. And then you have this sweet, sweet young man with this sweet, sweet puppy here. And so here, what I am trying to tell you is that I have said to you, I love you. I have expressed to you in my words how I feel about you. That's the same as in real estate. That is an expressed relationship. In any expressed relationship, there are either verbal words or there are words on a piece of paper that say, this is what I expect from you, and this is what you can expect from me. It's expressed. Then you have agency by the implication. You see this sweet young man, he's hugging this dog. That looks like a whole bunch of love to me. But that young man isn't telling verbally, or it's nowhere in writing, that he loves this pup or that this pup loves him. But his action towards the pup implies that he cares for this pup. Okay, so the expressed and implied is going to be very, very important in real estate. You want your agreements to be expressed, and you just don't want them to be expressed orally. You want to reduce all of your agreements to writing so that it is just laid out there in the what do you call it, the four corners of an agreement, what you're expected to do and what your client is expected to do. Okay, so let's look at this poll anywhere question. While showing his client's property to some potential buyers, the buyers ask broker Earl how much negotiation room there is in the price. Now think about who broker Earl represents. Earl answers by telling the buyers that he will write an offer at the price they choose and will try his best to negotiate a good deal for them. Is what he just did consistent with his agency duties and responsibilities? Let me see what you got to say about that, about old Mr. Earl here. Okay. Guys are still answering. While you guys were answering, I was just kind of watching the graph bars of each answer kind of go up and down. If you get to the test and you're having, and you answer a question and then you kind of go back and forth about, yes, I think that's right, or no, I think that's wrong. If you've already answered that question, stick with your first mind. Don't go back and change it unless you absolutely know that you think you may have answered it incorrectly. So the answer to was what Earl did consistent with his agency duties and responsibilities. And unfortunately for Earl, no. So the answer would be D, because his behavior may have created dual agency. The first line of the question, while showing his client's property to some potential buyers, well, this first line shows that the client is the seller, because Earl is showing potential buyers his clients, and you show houses of sellers. So the sellers are the people who have Earl's agency or have given Earl the agency. The potential buyers right now should be unrepresented third party or customers. So Earl should not have said, hey, offer this and I'm going to try to negotiate a good deal for you. That's what Earl would say to his sellers, but not to buyers. Okay? Now we've talked about what agency is. We've defined the agency relationships. We have created the agency. And now guess what? I don't want you representing me anymore. How do I get out of this? Hopefully, anytime someone wants to terminate or an agency relationship with you terminates, it's because you got them to the closing table, which means you getting that commission. So let's go ahead and talk about that. Number one, you can terminate an agency relationship once the purpose is completed. So if I say, hey, everybody out there, you guys are my agents, I'm selling my house, and we signed that agency relationship agreement, once we go to the closing table and it's closed and you've collected that money, that moolah, that commission, our agency is over because you did what I hired you to do. You sold my piece of property. Death or incapacity of either party. Now listen, unfortunately, that doesn't mean the death of you. That means the death of the buyer or the seller. Listen, it's just unfortunate that if something happens to you, you get hit by a bus, you break your leg, you're in a coma, you're out of town. How about that? You're out of town on vacation. No, it says death or incapacity. You're not there. You can't be found. Your broker just steps in and either assigns someone else, but this means the death or incapacity of the client, not you. Remember, you work on behalf of a broker. So even if I'm gone, my broker is there. Destruction of the property. Was it hit by a tornado? Was there a big earthquake? If the property has been destroyed, there is no agency relationship because nobody's buying it, no one's selling it. Expiration of the terms. In our agreements, we have to say, hey, you're going to allow me to represent you for X number of months. When those months come and go and I haven't fulfilled the duties or the completion of the project, it's over. Mutual agreement. We decide we don't want to work together anymore. Breach by one of the parties. Remember, parties means the client, the buyer, the seller, the owner of property. It never means you. Or by any operation of law, bankruptcy, foreclosure, because if something has happened in a court of law, there's nothing you can do about that. So that will terminate any agency relationship. Now, when we talk about agency and we talk about fiduciary duties, when you create agency with a buyer or a seller, that is called being their fiduciary, which means they have put you in a trust position in their lives for business. Now, the great thing about this is that you will probably see this theme running all through your studying and all through the course. And so you've already probably seen that you're going to remember these important fiduciary duties by the acronym OLD-CAR. You owe clients, the people you represent, obedience, loyalty, disclosure, confidentiality, accounting, and reasonable care. And I'm just going to say it again. Don't forget, these are the duties that you give to someone that you represent. Okay? Now, let's talk about confidentiality because it's very important. Things that should stay confidential is if a buyer is willing to pay a higher price. Is the seller willing to pay a lower price? My motivation for buying or selling. Anything like that has to do with things that another party wouldn't want to be used against them while they're trying to purchase or sell property is considered confidential information. So if you represent someone, and okay, you represent me, and again, I'm gonna make myself a seller. And the reason I'm selling this piece of property is because I got this fabulous job at Disney World. Sounds great, doesn't it? So I'm not in any distress needing to sell this piece of property. But guess what? I don't want a buyer to know that I'm having to move to Disney because they're going to say, oh, she's got a job somewhere else. We can get this piece of property for a much lower price. So please be very, very careful about things that you tell someone else about your client's position. Now, just because you don't owe the traditional fiduciary duties to a customer doesn't mean that you don't owe customers who are, again, are third-party unrepresented people something. You absolutely do. You owe them honesty, accounting, reasonable care, and you owe them disclosure. So that means that just because I have a buyer that may not want me to represent them, I just can't be all willy-nilly and do whatever I want. I still have to come to the table and be a professional. I have to be honest with them. I have to be upfront with them. If they give me any monies, if they give me any trust funds, non-refundable deposits, I've got to be able to source those to be a good steward of those and to do with those monies what I said I would do. I've got to deal with you in reasonable care as not to hurt you. And disclosure for me is a really, really big thing, especially when it comes to third parties who are not represented. If I know that your basement leaks and I represent you as the seller, I can't not tell the customer that. I have got to tell the customer that that basement leaks because I can't do anything that would hurt them. So if you get a buyer, or most of the time it may be the seller in that example, that says, hey, don't tell them this, you need to think about that, because probably the laws in your state says, hey, you have to disclose those kind of defects because that will directly affect the value of a piece of property for someone. Okay, now let's look at this poll anywhere question. Which of the following is not a responsibility of a licensee to a customer? Okay, looks like y'all are doing a good job. Probably going back and forth. Okay, so the answer is going to be C, and let's talk about why. So you're a licensee by the question, and you are with a customer, okay? You're with a customer. That's someone who is not represented. If you don't represent that customer, then you're not advising them and you're not helping them with the negotiation. You only help people that you represent with advice and negotiation, all right? If anybody, after they've decided that they don't want representation, decides that they want you to now represent them, you can then represent them. You know, you can just go ahead and do whatever your state says that you need to do to be able to get into an agency relationship with them. You can take someone from customer to client. All right? Right. So let's look at this. Interested buyers value a particular house above others because of its close proximity to the home of their aging parents. Which of the following agents would the buyers least want to share this information with? Who would you not want to know why your motivation for moving? Okay, so it looks like we have a pretty good consensus that the person you don't want to know that information would be the seller's agent or the listing agent. Because if the listing agent knows that, hey, these people like this house the most because they want to be closer to their parents, that listing agent is going to go back and tell that seller, and then that seller's going to say, got him. We can maybe try to demand a higher price or better negotiation on our part because now we know information about them. So you have to be very careful about things that you share. I see that some of you all put the facilitator or the transactional broker. That person can know that information, but they have to keep it confidential. No matter, remember, they don't represent anybody. All right. Very good, guys. Very good. Okay, now I'm going to ask this and then go over it with you. Okay, which of these is true of a sub-agent? We haven't yet talked about a sub-agent in this training, or not this training, but this test prep. So you go ahead and answer that and then we'll delve into it. Which of these is true of a sub-agent? Okay, so a sub-agent is responsible to his or her client. And so sub-agency is sometimes a hard concept to grasp. It's a hard concept for agents in my agency to grasp. What I try to remind them is if you are a sub-agent, that word agent implies that you represent someone. And I'm going to talk to you about sub in a minute, but as long as it has the word agent connected to it, you have those fiduciary duties that owe car to your client because you are representing someone. Okay. Remember, customers are never represented. So let's go on and let's talk about what this will look like. First, we're going to talk about it in the way of single agency, and we'll move forward and come back around to that. So in single agency, one agent represents one client. So you see here, there's the seller, there's broker A, and there are the licensees. As long as broker A is the only broker representing that seller, that's a single agency. Just like broker B over here is only representing the buyer, which means that all the licensees of broker B represent the buyer. But the broker is not representing the buyer and the seller, just broker B. So that's single agency when there is ever only one client. Okay? Y'all good with that? Or you can have it where the seller is represented, but there is no agent representing the buyer, which would mean that the buyer is unrepresented. Okay, they would be called a customer. So that's your single agency whenever there is only one side that is represented. Now, in some states allow dual representation, which means that a broker and his or her agent can represent the seller and the buyer in the same transaction. So let's look at here. A broker A right here can represent both the seller and the buyer in the same transaction. But guess what? Broker A has more than one licensee. In this example, they have licensee Z and licensee Z. So licensee Z through broker A represents both the buyer and the seller. Okay. I'm looking and seeing if I have that. Yes, very good. Okay. Now over here we have two licensees. You have a seller and a buyer that are both represented by the broker, but the broker has two licensees, Y and Z. Licensee Z represents buyer, but still through broker A. Licensee Y represents the seller through broker A. The broker is the key. If the broker represents both, then normally the licensee in each represents both. That would be dual agency because the broker represents both. In some states where there is not allowed dual agency, they use designated agency, and it's still this graph on the right side of your screen. Broker A can represent seller and buyer, but they may designate broker Y to work with only the seller, or they may designate broker Z to work only with the buyer, meaning neither Y nor Z would be considered a dual agent because they are designated to work with one party. Okay, so let's look at this designated agency. In this type of agency, all of the following apply except what? This is a good one, a tricky one. Okay, so I think that the majority are going to agree that in designated agency, one licensee may not represent both parties. So I want to go back because I want to make sure that I did not confuse you, and I want to make sure that when we end this that you understand designated agency a little better than when we came into this. So over here, this is dual agency in states. Well, okay, so we're talking about the general part. So you're going to have to know the difference between dual and designated. So dual agency says that all of these people, licensee Y, licensee Z, because they worked through broker A, are dual agents. But every state doesn't allow dual agency. So in states where there is no dual agent, but both of these licensees work for broker A is the dual agent. But broker A says, hey, licensee Y, you only represent the seller. And licensee Z, you only represent the buyer. I have designated you to work with buyer and seller, which makes these people designated. So designate these people designated, I'm sorry. Yes, these people designated, I'm sorry, which means in designated agency, the agents cannot represent both the buyer and the seller. They have to be designated by their broker who they are going to represent. Hope that gets that cleared up for you. If not, just jot your question down, and at the end, I will, of course, go over that again. Okay, let's look at this poll everywhere question. Which of the following is a benefit to clients in designated agency relationships? Why would a client be okay with this? This one's a little bit tricky as well, but we're going to help you through it so that you make sure you understand it and get it right on the test. Okay, so the answer to this one, which of the following is a benefit to clients in designated agency relationships, is that both clients are able to receive advice on negotiating strategy. So let's go back here. I'm going to keep coming back to this. Okay. In a designated agency relationship, because each client, the seller and the buyer, have different licensees representing them, that means that this buyer can get advice and negotiation strategy from their agent, and this seller can get advice in negotiating tactics through their licensee. So both of these are represented, which means they can get advice and help. So that's why designated agency would be great for these people. Okay. That was a tricky one. I really like that you powered through that one. Okay. Now here is where we're going to get down and talk about the sub-agency. Okay, so we've talked about single, we've talked about dual, we've talked about designated. So let's go to this sub-agency that we had the question about before. So with sub-agency, you have a seller that signs a listing agreement with a broker. Okay, that broker, here we're going to call broker A, agrees to let other brokers, licensees, represent the seller through broker A. So let's call me the broker A, and I represent the seller, which means that everybody in my office also represents the seller. Okay, now if licensees from other brokers do represent the buyer they are assisting, they may accept broker A's offer of sub-agency. I'm just going to give you an example. I'm broker A. I own a company, and all my licensees, of course, represent me. And I took a listing, so all of us represent that listing. Well, guess what? Maybe there's a buyer that's coming along that has an agent, or maybe has an agent that's outside of my company, not in my company. I can offer that agent sub-agency, which means they're a sub-agent of my seller and this company. That's what sub-agency is. So what is important for a buyer working with a sub-agent to understand? If you're a buyer and you're working with a sub-agent who now represents a seller, what do you need to understand, to be aware of? I'm going to wait just a little while longer to give the majority of people time to look at this and to answer. Okay, so looks like y'all are doing really good. B is the correct answer. A sub-agent is looking out for the seller's best interest, because what the sub-agent is doing is saying, hey, you may be bringing the buyer, but you don't represent the buyer. You really represent the seller through my offer of sub-agency. So in sub-agency, the agent from the other company actually represents your seller through your offer of sub-agency. Good, guys, good. Okay. Now, we've talked about creating agency relationships, but we have not talked about where we create those. And remember, I said that your agreements need to be expressed, and they need to be expressly reduced to writing. So let's talk about that. So The agreements that you get a seller to sign are called, I call them their listing agreements. So you have a couple different ones: open, exclusive, and the exclusive right to sell. Open means, guess what? I'm going to let 45 different agents from 45 different offices put signs in the yard, and the agent that sells my property is the one I'm going to pay. But guess what? If I decide to do it for sale by owner, or I bring my own buyer to my own property, I'm not paying anybody. That's what an open listing is. An exclusive agency listing says, hey, I'm only going to work with one agent, one listing agent. If that listing agent brings me a buyer and it sells, I'll gladly pay that listing agent. However, if I, as the seller, sell the property myself, I don't have to pay that agent. Those first two are good for sellers, maybe good for us too. But the exclusive right to sell, or the exclusive authorization form, is the one that most of us use. That one says no matter who sells the property, you and I, as the listing agents, have earned that commission. So we put it on the market and we market it, and someone else brings a buyer. That's fine. I'm another agent. I can agree to share my commission with you. Let's say an unrepresented buyer comes. Guess what? Seller can't say, I'm not going to pay you. And even if the seller says, hey, guess what? I found a buyer. Great. Thank you. You still owe me a commission. Open and exclusive agency allows for a seller not to have to pay out a commission. The exclusive right to sell says, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, you have to pay me a commission. And then you have the buyer representation agreements. Much like the exclusive right to sell, the exclusive right to buy, or the exclusive right authorization form means, hey, I am going to be the only agent that you use to look at and purchase a property. And if you go with someone else, you may very well owe me a commission. The non-exclusive says, hey, I'm going to go look at houses with this person, and this person. But if I decide to purchase a property that you showed me with you, I'll purchase that with you. The non-exclusive says, I'm going to go around and work with whoever I want to. The exclusive right to buy says, I'm working with you and you only. Okay. In the agency agreements, you're going to see the obligations of the parties, which means, hey, if I'm the listing agent, I'm going to lay out what I'm going to do for you. I'm going to market this piece of property. I'm going to put it in my MLS. I'm going to put it in the IDX feeds. For a buyer, I'm going to compile a list of you to go show you things, help you to closing. It's going to be termination dates. Remember, every agreement has to have a termination date. How long am I going to represent you? The extent of the authority. Am I your universal agent? Am I your general agent? Am I your specific agent? And remember, real estate agents are special or specific agents. It's going to have all of the parties' names, the description of the property, and the buyer agreement. When you're talking about what you're going to show a buyer, you make that general. So I am in Craighead County, Arkansas, which is in Northeast Arkansas. On my buyer's agreement, I may say, let's say that you are looking for something $500,000 or less. I may say single family property in Northeast Arkansas under $600,000. I know you told me $500,000 or less, but if you happen to go over $500,000, I want to be covered. And then in your listing agreement, you are specifically selling one piece of paper, one piece of property. So that is going to be a specific description. And lo and behold, you always want to know and have in writing your compensation, which is your commission. That's an important part of these agency agreements. How much can you expect to be paid for representing someone? So that amount, whether it's a flat fee, whether it's a percentage, in some states, whether it's hourly time worked, You want that in that agreement. And then you have to know how you are going to share that money with someone else. So people think that listing agents say, hey, I decide how much I'm going to share with a buyer's agent or someone that brings the buyer. Well, in reality, that's a conversation that me as the listing agent has with that seller that says, okay, you've agreed to pay me 10%. If someone else brings a buyer, how do you want me to share that 10% with that buyer's person, that buyer's agent? Everything you have to run past a buyer and a seller. Make sure that you get your agency agreements reduced to writing. So that's going to kind of bring us to the end of our general agency concepts. What I want you to know about general agency is that what you owe to clients is your fiduciary duties, old car. What you owe to customers is honesty, fair dealing, accounting. You work with customers, but you work for your clients. Okay? All good? Okay. So I also want you to know when you start your test, they may ask you some experimental questions, about 5 to 10. They're going to be ungraded, so you don't need to freak out about that. You want to check your candidate guide. You want to know how many total questions there are going to be and what your passing score is. If you don't know and it's hard for you to get in contact with somebody, if you get on your state commission's real estate page in Arkansas, it's AREC, Arkansas Real Estate Commission. I think it's TREC in Texas. Any of your regulatory agency, you can get that candidate handbook guide. Okay. Now, I'm here and I'm ready to take your questions. None popping up yet. That means I did a really, really, really good job. Oh, I hear somebody.
Let me pop in for a second, Felicia, and say thank you. Thank you so much. I loved your presentation. It was so interesting. And
Thank you.
And yes, like you said, it is time for questions. So you can type your questions into the Q&A in your control panel. And we'll give you a second to go ahead and ask them there. And I'll start sharing these with you, Felicia.
Okay.
The first one is from Amanda, who says, don't you also owe customers confidentiality?
Absolutely. You do owe customers confidentiality. There are things that you don't want. You're not going to talk about their financial position, nothing like that. So don't go around talking about all their stuff. You are correct.
Okay, thank you.
But just remember also that even though you owe a customer confidentiality, if you are representing a seller and then you have a customer buyer, you owe this person over here confidentiality, but it cannot trump what you owe your client.
That's a good distinction.
Yeah,
Thanks.
that can be very difficult. Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
All right, Lauren has a question. Let's say a person is moving out of their home and I'm an agent for the potential buyer, and I happen to know that is the reason they're moving. The agent for the potential, okay. My client, the buyer, asks me, I can't disclose information about the customer, but I need to be honest, provide honesty. This might be
Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
This may be a popular situation. What is an appropriate response? Maybe, I'm sorry, I'm not able to share that information.
Okay, so if I understand your question correctly, you don't represent the seller, but you represent the buyer?
Represent the buyer, and you know the reason that the person is moving.
If you have not represented the seller in a past time and know why they're moving, but you now, and so you've not represented the seller ever, but you know why they're moving because maybe their agent told you, guess what? You owe that duty of disclosure to your buyer. Absolutely. That's going to be a part of their negotiation strategy. Now, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I think that's smart too, that you're pointing out if you have never represented that seller, because
Correct.
the duty of confidentiality never ends, does it?
Right. The duty of confidentiality never ends. So if you've represented that seller before in trying to sell a piece of property and you know their motivation for selling, then you can't tell the buyer. But if you've never represented that seller, someone has told you, their agent has told you why they're selling, you owe that to your buyer. If you were, okay, what was my other one? If you represent the seller and you know why that seller is moving, and then you have a buyer customer that comes in, just wants to talk to you about it and says, hey, why is the seller moving? Then yeah, I have often said, listen, I don't have permission from my seller to give you that information. But if you think they may be moving because it's something related to the house having a problem, as the negotiations go on, my sellers would love to give you a chance to do a home inspection.
Great. That's a good question. Then another one from Joanne says, what percentage of agreements are exclusive versus exclusive right to sell?
Okay, so that number, I'm going to be honest, I do not have with you. I don't have for you. I would assume that most of us use an exclusive right to do something. And I say that only because the time, the energy, the expertise that you're going to spend working with someone, you don't really want them to be able to walk away from you and not pay you anything because they found their own buyer. I'm going to guess that it's a fairly large percentage.
Mm-hmm.
I will tell you, in my 20 years, and I'm in Arkansas, I have never, ever done an open listing or a non-exclusive right to buy, ever.
Okay, that's good to know. It kind of gives students an idea of what they'll see when they
Correct.
graduate, when they get their license. Okay,
Right.
Here's another one from Nancy. If
Okay.
you have a listing agreement, okay, and the lender begins foreclosure proceedings, does that end the listing agreement?
I am not an attorney, so I don't have the answer for that question, especially because I'm not in your state. I don't know the answer to that question. I can give you, and I'm going to preface this by saying, again, I am in Arkansas, and I have had that happen within our company, that because it was a foreclosure, it was an operation of law, which I taught you here. And so that canceled out our listing agreement. But I've also heard in some states that it takes a little bit more, it takes more time, more effort to do that. But as soon as that foreclosure notice went out in Arkansas, our listing agreement was terminated.
So Nancy, that might be a good question that you can ask your broker once you get your license, because right, there are a lot of differences between states.
Right. For the test, though, Nancy, for the test, you're going to answer yes. It cancels that listing agreement for the test.
Okay, here's another question. Thank you.
Okay.
This is from Emily. So just to clarify, she says just to clarify the first question, which I'm not sure what that's referring to, but here's the rest of it. Why wouldn't a special agent have the power to bind the principal to the lease or the sale?
Okay, so in reality, the only person that has the right to bind somebody is someone that has your universal power of attorney. If right now, let's say I'm representing sellers, I don't have the right to bind them to anything. What I am doing for them is trying to market their property. But if we get an offer, I can't bind them to anything. All I'm doing is marketing the property. That would mean that I'm the one that's looking at the listing, not the listing, but the offer and acceptance and saying, okay, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I don't need to show it to you. I'm binding you to this one. And we don't bind people. We don't have that power to bind people.
Okay, that's a good distinction. Thank you. That makes it clear for me.
Okay.
I hope that helps our students. Leslie has a question. Why would a sub-agent relationship occur? I'm not clear about why this would happen. So what's the reason for that?
Okay, so a sub-agency relationship may occur because maybe a buyer doesn't want to be represented. But in some states, to be paid, you have to be a part of the transaction, and so the listing agent would allow that. See, I want to call it the buyer's agent, but it's not the buyer's agent. That agent who brought the buyer to represent the seller. It used to be done that way. So let me give you a little history. Do we have time for a little history? Like, it'll be 30 seconds.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I'm going to say 40, 50 years ago. Don't hold me to the years because I don't really know. But in the beginning in the real estate industry, buyers had no representation. Every agent always represented the seller. That's just the way it was. Maybe in your readings you have heard of caveat emptor, buyer beware. That's because everybody always represented the seller all the time. So if I've got a house listed and this agent over here brings a buyer, well, back then that agent couldn't represent the buyer. They had to represent the seller. Okay, so in some states, people still practice that sub-agency where they don't want to represent the buyers. They won't have anything to do with that.
Got it.
And
Thank
some
you.
buyers don't want representation. And in those states where the real estate commission says to earn a commission, you have to be a part of the transaction, then they become a sub-agent.
Good. Thank you. I hope that answers your question. That makes sense to me. Here's another one. Can I represent myself in buying or selling as an agent? I'm in Tennessee.
So I am not up on the Tennessee state laws, but I do believe that in every state that if you're an entity that you own or you personally, if you are going to be involved in buying, listing, selling on behalf of yourself or an entity, you have to disclose that to all parties. So the answer to that is yes, you can do it, but you have to disclose that to all parties, and you have to run everything through your broker.
Yes, thank you.
Well,
and looks like we have one more. So
okay.
Thanks for your answers. Why is a sub-agency not a dual agency? So it says the broker could end up dealing with buyer and sellers. I think the question here is maybe the difference between sub-agency and dual agency.
Okay, so the difference between dual agency and a sub-agency is in dual agency, you're going to represent both buyer and seller. Okay, which means you owe everybody that whole list of old car. But in sub-agency, you're not representing both. You're only representing one in sub-agency, two in dual agency. Now, just because I work with you doesn't mean I work for you. You work for that seller. That client you work with. So the seller can say to me something like, hey, can you go down maybe to City Water and Light and pick up that utilities or something for me? That's fine. I work for you. Anything that's legal, a directive that you give me, I'm going to carry that out. Over here, though, I have a buyer. And if that buyer says, hey, I need you to get the updated utility bills on this, I don't have to do that for that buyer. Now, I'm going to still ask my seller because if that's what the buyer wants, no big deal. But I'm not obligated to do that. Now, I'm going to help this buyer get to closing because that's what's good for my seller. But I'm not going to help this buyer with negotiation strategy. I'm not going to tell this buyer, you need to put in a 10-day contingency notice on here. You need to make your offer contingent up on inspection. I'm not going to do that for somebody that I don't represent.
Good, thank you. That's an important distinction.
Yes.
And I know that when I was first learning about this, dual and sub-agency confused me too. So I hope that helps you listeners.
Yes. Yes.
It looks like we've covered all of our questions. So Felicia, is there anything else you wanted to cover before we wrap up?
I just want to wish everybody luck. If you have any questions, want to spend any more additional time with me, just reach out to everyone that you've just resourced. I'd be talk to you, and I'd be glad to give you some study tips, because this industry really, really needs knowledgeable people that are just ready to come in here and just ready with the professionalism. And so I wish all of you luck.
Felicia, thank you so much. Your knowledge, expertise, and willingness to share it with our student community is very much appreciated. And students, everyone attending, look for an email from us with a link to this presentation. And keep an eye out for invites to additional webinars in the near future. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us today, and we will see you next time.
Bye, guys.